Hi everyone, my name is Ann Napolitano and I am the author of the book Dear Edward, and I am going to talk to you today about a bunch of things, basically about my life, about the writing process, about how I became a writer, and then about the book itself. So to start, I also grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in Ramsey, New Jersey for the first 14 years of my life, which is in Bergen County. And let's see, I went to public school for elementary school, and when my earliest recollections, I wanted to be a paleontologist. But when I was in fourth grade, I got one of those vocabulary assignments that you guys doubtless still got as elementary school students, because my son, who's in fifth grade, still gets them. And it was a list of vocabulary words. And on this occasion, the teacher said, I want you to put them into sentences that connect so that it tells a basic story that's like a paragraph long, so that the sentence makes sense after each other. And I sat down to do the assignment after school, and I finished it, and I looked up at the clock, and I felt like 5 minutes had passed, and it turned out that 45 minutes had passed, which as a fourth grader is an enormous amount of time. And it blew my mind, because the only other situation in my life where time had disappeared like that was while playing, and this was homework. So I was like, I just thought, oh my God, like, this writing is magic. I just disappeared into it. And it was basically then that I decided, at the age of 9, that I wanted to be a writer. I don't think I told anyone, but I started writing a novel basically the next day, and it was about a wartime orphan. I think I wrote like 3 pages and then gave up. Shortly after that, I decided to write a novel about a wartime nurse. Probably wrote 7 pages and gave up. From the very beginning, I think I wanted to be a serious novelist, and at that age, I felt that if you were serious, then you wrote about war, even though I knew nothing about war. So I was a very shy child. So I went into middle school. I had a teacher in 8th grade, an English teacher, who I wrote a assignment for, like a sort of big assignment in the second half of 8th grade about Williamsburg, which again, I think still happens a lot. And I wrote a play, and while I was writing the play, it was like a stagecoach drama. But during the play, I figured out like what was going to happen at the end, and I hadn't known that in the beginning, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. I was very pleased with myself, and my teacher liked it. And then the summer after 8th grade, my father, who I think was concerned about me because I was so shy, spoke to my English teacher and asked her for a list of 100 classic novels that I should read. And then he mailed me the 100 classic novels to summer sleepaway camp. So everyone else is getting like cupcakes and candy care packages. I got 100 novels in a box, or it must have been a series of boxes. And among them were things like War and Peace and Anna Karenina. Completely unachievable to read in one summer, but reflective of what I love to do, and my father trying to feed that, which is very sweet. In high school, became even more shy, terribly shy. I would write, I think I tried to write something for the literary magazine that we had in high school. I think I published something, but I didn't work for the literary magazine. I was really underground about the fact that this is what I love to do. I loved English class. Probably the defining event for me of high school, which I basically wasn't very happy during high school, which is not unusual at all. I felt very old for my age, and also very shy and not good at being fun. And I had friends, like I had great friends, but it can be a really difficult period. So I feel for you guys being in high school during a freaking pandemic. In any case, I really wanted to take AP English. It was the only AP class that I really wanted to take. It was a great teacher, and the reading list looked amazing. And I was devastated because I wasn't chosen or allowed into AP English. I'm still mad about it, actually, But the reasoning was because the teacher said I didn't speak up enough in class because I was too shy. So I wasn't a good candidate for AP English and I didn't get in. And to some extent that was like a small turning point for me, because I was so clear that that was an injustice and that I belonged in that class and that no one could love reading more than I did. And the idea that there was some kind of qualification that would keep me out of it was just incorrect. And probably the only thing it made me do was like want to go to college and take English classes where they couldn't screen me out, which is basically what I did. So for going to college, what I decided as far as criteria, figuring out what to do, I still knew that I wanted to be a writer, or I wanted to write. And so I looked for colleges that had creative writing programs, and many don't, or didn't at that time anyway. And then I also decided that I didn't want to go to a college with a fraternity system, a Greek system it's sometimes called, because I realized my inability to have that kind of fun. Like, I just was not a good fit for the Greek system. I needed something like dorkier and artier, and I was very off-put by the whole like beer drinking, chest pounding culture. So I think it was a really good decision for me that I made at that age, and it actually ruled out so many schools that it was also very helpful to have that as criteria. So I do highly recommend sort of thinking about like who you are and what you think will be a good fit for you in all those ways, because social as much as academic is important for college. They might be 50-50 because you're going to live in this place for 4 years. So those are my two criteria. It had to have a creative writing program, and it couldn't have a Greek system. So my dream school was Wesleyan. I did not get into Wesleyan. I was very sad, but it doesn't matter. Like, that would be my basic hindsight realization. As long as it had those two criteria that it met for me, I had a really good chance of finding a place for myself there. And I think I could have equally found a place for myself there, you know, in a state school, in a city school. When I was growing up, there was a very clear sense of like the kind of schools you should go to, and I feel like some of that is breaking down, and I'm glad about that. Because the more clear-sighted you can be about like who you are and what you want to learn about, and what's important to you, then the better choice you can make and the more options you should have. So I ended up going to Connecticut College in New London, Connecticut, and they had a creative writing program. They had a wonderful creative writing teacher who's still there, named Blanche Boyd, who's an amazing author, and a real like force of life person. So she had a big impact on me. And while I was there, let me see what else let's talk about now. I did major in English literature with a concentration in creative writing. The creative writing courses had a really big impact on me. I will say there's like weird things that turn you on or turn you off. And my creative writing teacher was so cool that I looked at her and I was like, she drove a Trans Am, she wore cowboy boots, she was a lesbian, she was just awesome. She was like the full embodiment of herself, and she was great, amazing. But I looked at her and I was like, if that's a writer, I'm just not cool enough. So it threw more self-doubt for me. And then another thing that happened to me when I was in college was that right after my junior year, I got sick with a virus called Epstein-Barr, which is basically like a giant version of mononucleosis. It's a real bummer. I wouldn't recommend it, but what it basically does is wipes out your immune system so that you catch like everything that goes by, like every cold, every virus, every stomach bug. I got stomach food infections. What is it when you eat food and it makes you throw up? You're saying it now watching the video. You're right. That's what it's called. I got it all the time. I ended up going back to college my senior year, but only because I would be too depressed lying on my parents' couch at home in New Jersey. And so we decided it would be better for me to be not both sick and depressed. So I took a half load my senior year. Basically, I was sick for 3 years. I took a half load my senior year of classes. And then, so I didn't graduate with my friends at the end of my senior year because I didn't have enough credits. I ended up taking the rest of the classes at Rutgers the following year and, was mailed my diploma. But that ended up being a very important event for me, getting sick like that, because up until then I had been extremely healthy. After that went on to be extremely healthy. But I realized my mortality in a way that most 20-year-olds don't, like that your life can change on a dime. You can get sick, you can get hit by a bus. Something can happen in your life that means that maybe your parent gets sick, and because of circumstances in your family, you have to help them financially. Or there are things that can happen out of nowhere that can take a lot of your agency away from you. And so getting sick like that at that age, and then watching my 20-year-old friends like go to parties and bounce around with endless energy around me, made me think, oh, I need to be careful, and I need to really consider what I want to do. Like, I need to do what I want to do. I can't waste time because I don't know how much of it I'm going to have. And so at that point I was still secretly wanting to be a writer, but I had decided I probably would go into publishing because that was safer and it had health insurance and it was sort of more acceptable as a career choice to my parents and to the people around me. But in that sickness, I was like, nope, I'm going to try and be a fiction writer. I'm going to throw everything I have into that. And if I fail, at least it will be my failure. I'll own it, but it'll be mine. And that was really a really seminal moment for me. And so when I did eventually graduate from college, it took me that extra year of going to Rutgers. I applied to graduate school to get a degree in fiction writing. And really I did that to buy time for myself so that I would have a degree that would make my parents feel more comfortable and in a way make me feel more comfortable. It would buy me 2 years to take my writing very seriously and to see what I could do in those 2 years. And I met 2 other writers in that program that are still my first readers. So it was very valuable for me. And while I was in graduate school, I was working at Barnes & Noble in Union Square in New York. And then I started working as a personal assistant because I decided it was something that I could do that was very different from writing. Every day was different when you're a personal assistant. And also you could it was either personal assistanting, usually you're very on or you're very off. And I eventually I worked for a self-help writer, and then I ended up working for the rock musician Sting and his wife Trudy. I worked for them for 8 years. I worked out of their office home on the Upper West Side, and I had to deal with them because when they hired me, they knew I was an aspiring writer. I had never published anything. But I said to them that I was a writer. And so I made a deal with them that when they were out of the country, I would work 4 days a week. And when they were in the country, meaning the US, I would work 7 days a week. So that gave me a 3-day, and basically it ended up being a 6-month split of the year where they were in the country or out of the country. So when they weren't here, I had 3-day weekends to write. And that's what I did. And during that time, I had 2 novels that didn't sell. During graduate school, wrote a novel, which I think is terrible, but I think I needed to write it in order to figure out how to write a novel. There is a saying that writing a short story is like swimming across a lake. You can see the other side of a lake, even if you've never swum that far before. You can probably do it, assuming we're not talking about Lake Superior or something. I'm talking about a lake where you can see the other side. But writing a novel is like swimming across an ocean, and nobody knows how to swim across an ocean. The only real way to figure out how to swim across an ocean is to swim across an ocean, and probably screw up and climb into the rescue boat and then jump back into the water and then try it again and then realize what supplies you needed and what training you needed and all that kind of thing. And writing a novel is like that. So I really think the first novel that I wrote when I was in graduate school, I wrote in order to figure out how to write a novel. And then I sent it out to agents, which is what you do, and 80 agents rejected it. And that was sad. And then I finished graduate school, so I put that novel in a drawer, and I started another novel. And that one took me 3 years to write, I think. So at that point, I was working as a personal assistant. And then when I was about 27, I sent it out again to agents. And this time, 3 different agents wanted to represent the book, represent me, be my agent. So that was great. And I chose the one that I wanted to work with. And I felt very pleased. And I was like, yes, this is finally taking off. And then the agent was unable to sell the book to a publisher. And she almost sold it. It was like someone's boss went on maternity leave. But in any case, she was not able to sell it. And that was like the biggest blow. Because I was like 27 or 28 at that point. I really don't write short stories, so I had never published anything after college. I published 1 short story in college, in the college magazine. But other than that, I had never published anything. And I had framed my whole life. Everyone knew that I wanted to be a writer. I had not been shy about it. I had planned my work life around it. And I was failing with like a big capital F. And I was depressed. And my dad was sending me brochures for law school in the mail, because they were like, oh my God, what's going on? What is she going to do? Because personal assistanting is not considered to be like a career, although it can be. So what I realized was that I started writing again because it was the only thing that made me feel better. So the only way I could climb out of the depression of not being able to sell 2 novels was by writing another novel. And that realization that that's what I had to do in order to feel better it lifted an enormous weight off my shoulders, because I realized, oh, like writing is part of who I am. I'm going to go on writing for the rest of my life, whether I sell a book or not. And that was a really freeing realization, because it didn't matter anymore. I mean, I assumed at that point that I was not going to be published, but I knew I was going to keep writing, because in order for me to feel like a whole, healthy, emotionally level person, I have to write. So it took a lot of the pressure off. And so I started writing a 3rd novel, and inevitably that's the one that sold. And that one's called Within Arm's Reach, and it's loosely based on my mother's large Irish Catholic family, and it's set in Ramsey, New Jersey, where I grew up. And so that was great. And I quit my job for Sting and Trudy. I had met my husband through them, and I had made enough money where I could spend like 3 years writing another book. And the 2 books I'd written, 3 books before that I'd written, had each taken about 3 years. So I was like, this is great. This is going to work really well. And then that novel took me 7 years to write. And it's called A Good Hard Look, and it's set in the 1960s in Milledgeville, Georgia. And the real short story writer, Flannery O'Connor, is one of the characters in the book. And so at that point, if we're talking about what my writing life looked like and looks like, before I had children, I have 2 sons. One just turned 13. One is 10, about to turn 11. So they're in 5th and 7th grades. So it's been a while since before I had children. Before I had children, I was pretty regimented about my writing. I would wake up in the morning, and basically I had to write like 4 or 5 pages before I could leave my apartment, or go to the supermarket, or I would like hang a carrot of some kind. I couldn't watch the TV show I wanted to watch until I had written a certain amount. And when I was working as a personal assistant, I had those 3-day weekends, and I just wrote for the whole 3 days. I didn't socialize that much. I really was pretty monkish about it. I mean, I had friends. I would see my friends. I would have dinner or something like that. But then I would come back and write more. And I was happy. Like, that's what I wanted to do. Since I had children, now I will write whenever and however. Usually in non-pandemic times, I write after they go to school. I think about the book that I'm working on a lot, so I will have ideas, take notes, even when I'm not officially writing. So, and I also I teach, not intermittently, I teach fiction writing. I've taught for NYU School of Continuing and Professional Studies. I taught for a place called Gotham Writers Workshop. I've taught at Brooklyn College's graduate program. And I am I always forget my title, I'm an associate editor at One Story Literary Magazine, which is a great literary magazine that sends you one story a month in like an envelope this size. And they're in their 17th year, I believe. I might be wrong, it might be longer. And one of the most beautiful things about it is that we only publish an author once. So I think they're on like issue number, let's say 243. So that's 243 different writers. And we also have a one teen story that we run through contests, which take stories from teens. So you might want to look at the website for one story. So I go to their office one day a week and edit stories for the magazine, as well as teach. I've done writing for like Pearson Education, which is an education company. I've done various things to sort of make ends meet while I write. And I guess that brings us to Dear Edward. So in 2010, I became obsessed with a story that was in the news. There was a real plane crash. There was a flight from South Africa bound for London, and it crashed in Libya. And there was only one survivor, and it was a 9-year-old Dutch boy. And they found him still buckled into his airplane seat about a half-mile away from the rest of the wreckage. And he had a punctured lung and a broken leg, but he was otherwise fine. And everyone else in the plane, including his parents and his brother, had died immediately. And it was huge news at the time, 24/7, cover of the New York Times. Most people don't remember it anymore because so many other terrible things have happened, but I was obsessed with this story immediately. And there was a photo that was printed with most news stories about the crash, and it was a photo of the little boy in his hospital bed. And he was so beautiful and so small and so broken. And I looked at that picture and I thought, how is that little boy going to be able to get out of that hospital bed? How is he going to be able to walk out of that hospital without his mom and his dad and his brother? Like, how is he going to go on and have a Tuesday? How is he going to smile ever again? How is he going to go to school? How could he possibly be okay in any real way after going through something like this? And I said, I have 2 boys. At the time, they were 1 and 3. And I knew from the way that this obsession felt almost right away that I was going to have to write my way into understanding what it was that was so gripping about the story for me. And what I had to do was to create a set of fictional circumstances that would allow me to believe that it was possible for this little boy across the world to be okay. Or to believe that if something terrible happened to one of my boys and I wasn't there to save them, that it's possible that the world could help them towards safety. And Dear Edward took me 8 years to write, and I actually loved writing it. One of the things that I discovered while I was writing it, that in order for Edward to have a possibility of being okay, was that it required great kindness from the people around him. And so every day I was writing about people being kind in a non-cheesy, hopefully flawed human way. But I was writing my way into this place of kindness every day. So it was this fictional world that I really loved having in my brain. It was very gratifying. So I'm going to read you guys a little bit from Dear Edward, and then I guess I will see you on, I'm going to say June 11th, but whichever day we have decided to have a chat. So the part I'm going to read is from the 2nd chapter in the book. So it's no surprise that this book is about a plane crash. I'm not giving anything away. My flight goes from Newark Airport bound for Los Angeles, LAX. And so the first chapter is Edward and his parents and brother boarding the flight in Newark, as well as a couple other passengers that we get to know on the plane. So the end of chapter 1 is the flight taking off. And then the 2nd chapter is later that same day, and the plane has crashed. So for the rest of the book, these 2 storylines will alternate. We'll find out what happens to Edward after the crash. while every other chapter takes us through the plane journey and eventually the crash of the plane. So this is about 3.5 minutes, so it's not too painful, I hope. So this is June 12th, 2013, evening. The National Transportation Safety Board's GO team is at the site 7 hours after the accident, the length of time it takes for them to fly from DC to Denver and then drive rental cars to the small town in the flatlands of northern Colorado. Because of the long summer daylight, it's not quite dark when they arrive. Their real work will take place at sunrise the following day. They are here now to get a sense of the scene, to simply begin. The town's mayor is there to greet the NTSB lead investigator. They pose for a photograph for the media. Except for the handshake, the mayor, who is also a bookkeeper because this town can't afford full-time employees, tucks his hands in his pockets to hide the fact that they're trembling. The police have cordoned off the area. The NTSB team, wearing protective orange suits and face masks, climbs over and around the wreckage. The land is level in every direction, the surface burned, charred, a piece of toast blackened under a broiler. The fire is out, but the air is charged with heat. The plane sluiced through a cluster of trees and dug itself into the earth. The good news, the members of the team tell one another, is that it wasn't in a residential area. No humans on the ground were hurt. They find 2 mangled cows and a dead bird among the chairs, luggage, metal, and limbs. Families of the victims arrive in Denver by plane and car over the 24 hours following the event. The downtown Marriott has several floors reserved for them. At 5 p.m. on June 13th, the NTSB spokesman, a man with acne-scarred skin and a gentle demeanor, gives an update to the families and media in the hotel banquet hall. Family members perch on folding chairs. They lean forward as if the skin on their shoulders can hear. They bow their heads as if hair follicles might pick up what no other part of their body can. Pores are open, fingers spread. They listen fiercely, hoping that a better, less crushing truth exists beneath the facts being delivered. There's a cluster of elaborate flower arrangements in the back corner of the room, which no one looks at. Red and pink peonies in giant vases, a cascade of white lilies. They are left over from a wedding held in the room the night before. This smell will keep several family members out of flower shops for the rest of their lives. The press stand apart at the briefing. They avoid eye contact with the relatives during interviews. They develop their own tics. One man scratches his arms as if he's been attacked by poison ivy. An on-air reporter fixes and refixes her hair. They disseminate the updates in live television interviews and through emailed AP reports. They focus on the quote-unquote known passengers. A plastics baron, famous for building an empire and automating thousands of employees out of work. A Wall Street wunderkind worth an estimated $104 million. A United States Army officer, 3 college professors, a civil rights activist, and a former writer for Law and Order. They pour facts into hungry mouths. This news story has captivated the world. Every corner of the internet has weighed in. A reporter holds up a copy of the New York Times to a camera to show the huge block headline, the kind normally reserved for presidential elections and moonwalks. It reads, 191 die in plane crash, 1 survivor. The relatives have only one question when the press briefing comes to a close. They all lean toward it like a window in a dark room. How is the boy? Thank you for listening to me today, and I look forward to chatting with you guys next month. Thank you very much.